Hey, this is John with Two Moose Home Inspections, and welcome to the August 2021 in-service training. All right, like usual, we have a lot of stuff to cover. So again, 2x speed, that's my recommendation to get through all this material as quickly as possible. So let's go ahead and jump in, take a look at what we have going on. So August 2021 in-service training, the very first thing is safety, house security. So here's what happened. Jeremy was at a house and he was taking some photos and doing what he needs to do at the house. And whenever he arrived to the house, there were two guys fiddling with the lockbox. And so he basically said, hey, what are you guys doing? They're like, oh, we're here to see the property. Okay, that's great, all well and good. But you don't have the code to that box, do you? Nope. And then Jeremy's like, okay. And they're like, well, we'll just follow you in. No, that's not how it works. So basically what happens is that if somebody wants to have a showing, whether it's a realtor and their client, it makes no difference whatsoever. If they do not have the access codes to get into that property, they are not allowed in that property. Because whenever we enter the property, we assume responsibility for what happens to that property. And if we allow some vandals to come in and totally destroy that property, well, that would obviously be a very bad thing for our insurance provider. So the main thing is that if we have an opportunity to protect the house by preventing somebody from being there, we will definitely take that opportunity. We are not going to put ourselves at additional risk just because somebody wants to see the house. So Jeremy did the right thing. He said, sorry guys, you're going to have to come back later with the code. I am not allowing you in. And if they were to refuse, which they kept pushing and pushing and pushing, but if they were to have refused, then Jeremy would have said, okay, I'm not doing this inspection. It is not safe to do the inspection. I will leave the house locked and secured because I cannot keep these people out of the house, and he'll come back another time to do the inspection. Obviously then notifying the listing agent, notifying the buyer's agent, and notifying our clients. So the next thing that we have is that I'm moving to North Carolina. Whoa, okay, so what's this all about? What's gonna happen to the business? What's going on? What's happening? Well, so basically, my wife has been in medical school for the last 4 years, and she graduated medical school, and now she's a doctor. So now that my wife is a doctor, that means that she has to go to a residency program. So basically, that is the specialty that you decide to go into. My wife is going into emergency medicine, so she'll be an emergency medicine doctor. And so basically, her residency program started back in June, so we got her out to North Carolina, got the house set up, got everything all taken care of 100%, but I still had a few things I need to wrap up with the business. And so now all of those things are wrapped up in a pretty little bow, and I'm ready to move on. Now, what you may not have noticed is that with the business, Shea and Jeremy have been taking over the majority of the inspections, and I've basically been doing all the paperwork, all the business administration stuff, and everything along those lines. And so it has been phenomenal to have those two guys taking care of the business. So what's going to happen whenever I go to North Carolina? Well, Shea and Jeremy are still going to be doing the exact same job that they've already been doing. But in addition to that, what's going to happen is that I'm going to be taking care of all the marketing. I'm going to be taking care of all the business admin. I'm going to be taking all of the HR, payroll, scheduling, any kind of issues that arise, anything, making sure we have the appropriate equipment, reordering supplies as they need it, because like water sampling and sewer scope all take supplies that we need to make sure everybody has. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm still going to be doing behind the scenes. It's just you won't see me out doing the actual inspections. So that's pretty much the update on what's happening with me moving out to North Carolina. The business is still going to operate same old, same old. It's just that I'm going to be doing stuff in the background, just happen to be in a different state. That's all. The residency program is a 3-year program. My wife is looking into doing a fellowship, so it might be 4 years. And then we'll be coming back to Colorado, hopefully shortly thereafter, but obviously who knows where life will take us. So the main thing is the business is still healthy. The business is still good. Shea and Jeremy are still amazing, and they're going to be taking care of us, no problem. So the next thing that we have is that we have paintball in-service training. What? Wait, what? Paintball in-service training? All right, so what's going on is that kind of as a send-off and a celebration, Jeremy is a phenomenal paintballer. Like, could have been pro 100%, been sponsored in the past paintballer. Jeremy is badass whenever it comes to paintball. So he wants us all to get together and just have a day of paintballing, just the inspectors. And so that's going to be a little bit later this month, and that is going to be my final send-off, our last in-service training that we're doing together as a family, and it should be a lot of fun. So I'm really, really, really looking forward to that paintballing adventure. And so then what happens after that? Well, I still want the culture to be the same. I still want everybody to get together, and I still want everybody to have dinner on the business once a month to get all the families together and just have a night where everybody can just enjoy themselves. And so that is still going to be happening every month with our in-service training. So they'll pick the restaurant, they'll go, they'll get the whole family together, and it's going to be awesome. So very, very excited about that. All right, moving back into Notion. let's start talking about some defects as soon as we have a little bit of tea. All right, so very first one, owner's closet, unable to inspect. All right, so why does that even matter? Well, it matters because I don't know what's behind that door. Now, the owners should have unlocked everything, but sometimes these houses are being rented as a currently being rented as a rental property, and so the owner's closet remains locked, and they never gave us the key or anything to be able to access it. Most times, the owner's closet just has some skis and a snowboard, and like that's good to go. But it's just important that if there is something that we can't get into, that we just let you know that we aren't able to get into it. So guardrails, the guardrail gap is greater than 4 inches. So basically just imagine yourself, and I try to tell my inspectors, imagine yourself as an infant, imagine yourself as a 90-year-old version of yourself, and imagine yourself as a raindrop. This time, I want you to imagine yourself as an infant. Because it's larger than 4 inches, you could crawl right off that edge and have a really, really bad time. So we just want to make sure that if there's ever a guardrail, that the gap is 4 inches or less. And the idea is that, sure, things can be grandfathered in, but you know, your grandfather didn't grow old by making silly mistakes, and this right here is a silly mistake. It's very inexpensive to get another dowel and just stick that right in there, and then we're safe, we're good to go, everything's fine. All right, this deck, wood in contact with soil. Now, it's okay for wood to be in contact with soil, but if you can see this particular wood, we're having some issues with the wood, and I think it's pretty evident in these pictures that the water is soaking up into the wood, and then that is causing an issue with rot. If that is the case, then that deck is not going to be well supported, and we're going to have quite a few issues moving forward. So, guardrails, stairs, handrails, none of this is present. If you're greater than 30 inches above the grade, then you need to put in some type of a handrail. Because again, imagine yourself as an infant, that would be bad. Imagine yourself as a 90-year-old version of yourself, that would be bad. And so falling off of a deck is not a good idea. And anytime that there are stairs, 4 or more, we need to have a handrail. So we just want to make sure we get that stuff installed. So obviously the Protectant is failing on this house. We need to restain the house. Now the thing is, whenever water enters wood, it displaces minerals. And whenever those minerals are displaced, what happens is that the minerals are displaced and they cannot be put back in. So if the minerals cannot be put back in, okay, well then we're always going to have that line of staining, and that just doesn't always look great and can't always be covered up with a traditional stain. Now, after a couple coats, it might be less noticeable, but once the wood has been damaged, the wood never forgets. It will never forget that it has been damaged. And so was it that a sprinkler system was spraying the house? Was it that they just haven't put any stain on the house for multiple years? Who knows? But even if you do try to stain it, it still might not look as good as new. Moving on, we have Egress Inadequate. So basically, again, imagine yourself as an infant. Heck, this time, imagine yourself as a toddler. If you cannot get up, open, and out of this window, then you're going to have a bad time if there were to be a house fire and this was your only means of escape. As a parent, it is very, very, very important that we make sure that our children have a way to exit the house, and not only that they have a way to exit the house, but they've been taught this is how you can exit the house if there's an emergency. They always say do fire drills, fire drill, fire drill, fire drill, do a fire drill. Could you as an adult get out of this? Because I'll tell you what, I could not get out of this particular situation. Even if I broke the glass, if there was snow on top of, you might be able to see that little bit of wood right at the top. If there was snow on top of there, I may not be able to lift that up. And even with me and all my amazing strength, I probably could not escape if there was a fire. And that is really, really scary. So this particular deck, I had a good time on this deck. As I'm walking up the stairs, the deck just started to sway back and forth. And these stairs, you can see that they do have a horizontal, basically like a knee bracing, but a brace that comes down at a 45-degree angle to prevent that horizontal movement left to right. But the bracing just was inadequate. It was not strong enough. So we need to add in more bracing, because anytime that there's movement, the fastener is also moving. And if that fastener is moving, eventually the fastener is going to fall right out. And that is what's starting to happen on this one. You can see a couple of nails that are pushed back almost about an inch. So no good there. All right, this particular house, kind of sad as well, is that this house was sold as a log cabin, a true log cabin, and priced as such. But it turns out that everything was a log veneer. Now, I started getting some ideas that it was a log veneer, and basically all of that, came to be the truth. But on the back of the garage, they did a really, really, really bad job. So these logs are like a letter C. And what happens is that rainwater will come down and strike the log, come around that letter C, and instead of just falling right off, will come back, touch that sheathing of the house, and then just move down behind each one of these logs. And so now we're going to have water that is going down behind each of these logs. Even though it's not a true log cabin, even though it is a log cabin veneer, on the back of this garage, it is imperative to put chinking in there to make sure that the water comes around, down the chinking, around, down the chinking, all the way down to the ground without getting trapped behind the log veneer. So these windows, there was a note that the windows do not work, but then the buyer was informed, oh no, the windows actually do work. Now, we've talked about integrity in the past, and it might have just been a miscommunication, so I'm not going to say anything here, but they specifically stated, no, the windows have been fixed, everything is good. Well, let me just tell you, the windows were not fixed, and everything was not good. And so then the problem with that, of course, is that do we need to replace all of that, like, whole window frame? Is there something we can do to make a repair? And the fact is, I don't actually know if I have an answer. I know that we can replace some of the hardware on the cranks, but also there's a fitment issue where the window will not close all the way. I even went out onto that deck and started pushing on the window, trying to get it to close and be able to latch. Just wasn't happening. So that whole window at some point may need to be replaced, especially since it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. All right, this sliding door was kind of interesting. So what was happening with this sliding door is that either at the time of the installation or overtime or whatever it may be, on the bottom of the track, instead of it being completely flat, completely level, there's like a little bit of a hump. Now that hump doesn't seem like too much of a big deal, except that the rollers were then binding on that hump, which is going to put unnecessary strain on the basically the axles of those rollers. It's going to put unnecessary strain on any of the weather sealing that's on the bottom of the door. And over time, it's just going to wear out the door. Now, in addition to that, it was extremely difficult. So what's the repair? Well, you kind of have to remove the entire door, shave down that section, and then reinstall the door. And that is quite the undertaking just to fix a little issue of the sliding door binding. So this house looks like it was hit by a tree. Nobody said anything about it being hit by a tree. Nobody said that there were any issues going on or whatever. And okay, that's all well and good. That's perfectly fine. No issues going on. Sounds great. Whatever. Except look at this. Tell me that there was not physical damage. Tell me that there was not something that struck this particular part of the roof. I mean, there is what you can see is where that small arrow is. The fascia actually is cracked, which means something hit it with such force that it caused that wood to buckle so much and with such intensity that it snapped that wood. And then you see all the shingles that are damaged, and yeah, just not great. And then the heat tape isn't quite where it needs to be. And then if we take a look, there's our culprit. So we can see right down here, they had cut down that tree, or at least the tree had fallen, and then they cut down the stumps. So that way we don't have a big broken tree and stump and all that kind of stuff. But if you follow that right there, that makes perfect sense that is what struck the house. So again, integrity. If you know that your house was struck by a tree, because I do think that there are some structural issues, because if you can buckle and break the fascia board from that intense of an impact, imagine what you're doing to everything else inside that roof structure. So just something to be mindful of. All right, this dimmer, and I don't know if you can see it right here, but it is 150 degrees Fahrenheit, 150 degree Fahrenheit. I touched it and it burned. Like I could not hold my hand on there. It was way too hot. 150 degree Fahrenheit. So what's happening here? Basically, there are two types of dimmers. There's a PWM, pulse wave modulator, and so that is used for like LED lights, and it'll pulse at like 200 milliseconds, and it'll be on, off, on, off. And then it does that at 200 milliseconds. And so then that would be a brighter light, or it can go on, off, on, off, on, off, and it does that at 200 milliseconds, and that would be a very dim light. And so what that's actually doing is it is stopping the electricity from moving forward, and then therefore the light becomes dim. Now the thing about this is that this type of dimmer is a traditional dimmer. Now what does that mean to be a traditional dimmer? What that means is that with the whole idea of conservation of energy, if energy is going into a system, then what that means is that I can neither create nor destroy energy. So what am I going to do with that energy? Well, if I'm going to all these lights, I can have the lights take all of the energy, and then they're going to convert that into light with a little bit of a byproduct of heat. And that's with an incandescent bulb. Or with an LED, there could be a lot more light with a lot less heat. So that's just efficiency. Now on this, the way the dimmer works is that to reduce the amount of energy, it actually will convert some of that energy into heat. And there's an allowable amount, and each one of these switches is rated to say, hey, this switch is capable of handling 200 watts. This switch is capable of handling 100 watts. And so it just depends on the type of light bulbs that you're going to install. Now, this was installed with a bunch of halogen light bulbs, which you know halogen light bulbs have a high wattage, and there were a bunch of halogen light bulbs. So we're getting a ton of wattage going through this system. So if let's say we have a system that has 1500 watts and I'm trying to take off 20% of that, well, that's 300 watts of power that I have to dissipate into heat. That's crazy. So if we were to, two options, one would be replace this particular this particular switch with a new dimmer that maybe isn't malfunctioning, if that's what this is, or replace all of those light bulbs with high efficiency LED and see if that brings down the temperature. Either one of those fixes would be appropriate, but it's just this is by far the hottest dimmer switch that I've ever interacted with. Well recovery test failure. Okay, so basically this well lasted about an hour and then it ran dry. This might be our 6th or 7th well that has run completely dry this summer. And that's not an uncommon thing for a well to run dry. Now, just keep in mind that the water levels during the summer definitely are lower than they are during other periods, like during the spring. During the spring, we have our spring runoff, we have a lot of rain, we have all those kind of things. Well, maybe in Colorado, we don't have a lot of rain, but for Colorado, it's a lot of rain. And so as the summer progresses, our water table is going to get lower and lower and lower. And if these wells were not dug deep enough, or if there is a motor, like for instance, this motor was producing 4.04 gallons of water per minute before it just died out. Maybe they put too powerful of a well pump inside of that well, and they really should have toned that down a little bit to maybe 2 gallons per minute. And then if it was 2 gallons per minute, then maybe we would have lasted the entire, testing. And so it's just one of those things that whenever I say that it failed, okay, yeah, it failed. But again, do you want everybody to be taking showers while you wash the car, while the lawn's irrigation is working, while you're filling up, a bathtub, while you're doing whatever? Then yeah, this isn't enough water for you. But if you're a normal person, maybe it's enough, but you still might have to be conscientious of what it is that you're doing. And so do you need to have a cistern? Do you need to have, some type of water storage solution? Yeah, probably. I would have an extra 300 gallons in a water storage thing. I would slow that pump down to 1 gallon per minute. I would fill up my 300 gallon tank and I would be happy as a clam. So moving on. Pretty please, don't have locked doors that they're locked on both sides. That is just so unsafe. If you do not have the key, then you are trapped inside of a room or you cannot get to the next room. In the case of a fire, this is extremely dangerous. You should only have the keyed side on the exterior of the building or further out of the building, because nobody would be rushing to the center of the building if there was a fire, except for a firefighter, but they have the tools to get through these types of doors. It's just, I understand why people do it, but it is one of the most unsafe things that you can do. Just have something that is always there that you can lock and unlock a door. And teach your kids how to lock and unlock doors too, whenever they're old enough to, not eat something that they shouldn't, that's found, in our chemical storage area or whatever. So this is weird. Dark rooms. Okay, why did we call out dark rooms? Well, basically, some of these rooms are operated by light switches, and so then the light switches will turn on and off a certain number of lamps. Some of the rooms, the light switches do not operate those outlets at the bottom, and you have to rely 100% on lamps. And sometimes you go into a room and you go to enough houses where it's like, wow, this is a really, really dark room. And most of the time they show these houses during, the middle of the day where we have all this beautiful natural light. Everybody's opened up every single curtain. You're waving to your neighbor through the bathroom window, because everybody can see into your house. But in reality, whenever you're using that house, you're going to have the blinds drawn and it's going to be a lot darker. And so knowing that, okay, we're going to have a lot of lamps, or we're going to have to do something to get some type of in-ceiling lighting system, which nowadays is awesome. You can do a faux ceiling that uses these little LED pucks that are, no more than 3/4 of an inch thick. And so you can just bring down a faux ceiling and have your ceiling be, approximately 1.5 inches lower than it normally would be. And you can have in-ceiling lights that is so much less expensive than trying to figure something out whenever you don't have an attic access or whatever. It's really the way to do it if you need more light. So just something we keep, that we want to put into your mind, so that way you're aware that, hey, this might be a dark room. Firewood too close to the house. please stop putting your firewood this close to the house. Not only do snakes and rodents and insects love being this close to your house, which gives them the ability to urinate, defecate, or start eating your house or damaging it in other ways to make nesting material, just get that firewood away. The other thing is it traps moisture up against the house, which is not good for any of your paint, stain, or any other type of protectant. It's really bad for the materials. And then also, if there is a fire, you now have just put all of this combustible material right next to your house. So if we have a fire, your house is done. It's absolutely done. Get a dedicated place to put firewood, shovel the snow in the wintertime, maybe put down some flagstone pavers. That way you can get to it in the summer without getting your feet muddy. You know, a million different things can be done, but leaning it up against the house, aside from even the physical damage of abrasion, rubbing onto your house, just no need to have firewood near your house. All right, Federal Pacific. Nothing like beating a dead horse, right? If you have Federal Pacific, get it replaced. Just billions of dollars of lawsuits, hundreds of thousands of houses burned down. It's insane. All right, your filter is dirty. I think we said this in the last one, but if the filter is dirty, it's just a canister filter to collect sediment and other things like that. Replace the filter, so turn off the water on both sides, unscrew it, put in a new filter, screw it back on, and then slowly turn the water back on, purge any air, and then you're good to go. Really easy peasy. You should be doing it at least annually, but the reason they make it a clear container like that is so that way you can visually see what the condition of that filter is and replace it as needed. So wiring, aluminum single strand wire. This is quite the find. So aluminum wiring is really bad because aluminum wiring can overheat and then catch on fire and have a lot of issues. Now the main place where we have issues is actually at terminals like this, where we tighten it down. That thermal expansion, contraction, and tightening things down, if not done properly, then can lead to fire, and that is obviously bad. So having single strand aluminum wiring, bad. Now, braided or stranded aluminum wiring is perfectly fine. That's what most of your service panel entrants are going to be, and some of your larger gauge wires, because it's less expensive. But whenever it is braided or stranded like that, that is perfectly acceptable. It's just whenever it is a single strand that there are some major and significant issues with aluminum wiring. Now, how is it that this got found? Well, because the service panel was painted shut. Now, we can cut open the service panel. We can take a razor blade down the edge, down the bottom, across the top, on the other side, and we can pull that off. But sometimes pulling off a painted service panel, no matter how hard you try, will completely damage the paint or the drywall surrounding. And so in this particular instance, Shea made a really good call. He said, okay, this particular service panel is painted shut. What can I do to double check the wiring? And he pulled a receptacle out of the wall, and boom, there it was, aluminum wiring. So, amazing job for Shea. Really, really well done. That's exactly what we want to see. And it was fabulous. It was really, really a good find, because that can sometimes be very costly. All right, baseboard heater not functioning. So here's the thing about summertime in the mountains is that a lot of these places are operated by an HOA, and they'll actually turn off the boiler zone that would provide heating to these houses, because they don't want to have a vacant rental property at 90 degrees all summer long, wasting everybody's energy bills. So they'll actually turn off the heat during the summertime because it's unnecessary. That could be it. And then we'll also see on another one here that it could be that there is a warm weather shutdown. WWSD is what it was on this one panel. And a warm weather shutdown basically says it's really warm outside, and what you're asking for is unreasonable, because we need to have proper cooling inside of this device. And if it's 80 degrees outside and you're asking to be 90 degrees in your house, we're not going to do that. And that's the problem sometimes with testing heating systems in the summer, is that some heating systems are just too smart for their own good, and you can't even test them. And could we go into the diagnostics and force an override? Perhaps if we had the diagnostic access codes or whatever it may be on some of these digital devices. However, if we do that and we are not HVAC professionals, we could potentially damage the unit. So we just say, if it doesn't work at the thermostat, it doesn't work at the thermostat, and then you will figure out with the seller, with the HOA, why is it that the heat is not working? And that would then be a really good conversation to have with them. So let me get another drink right here. Fungal growth, floor structure. So this crawl space was a little bit damp, not too bad, but a little bit damp. Anytime that there's elevated levels of moisture, what can happen is that we can have fungal growth. And if there is fungal growth, then that of course is a bad thing. But remember, there's this Goldilocks zone. There is too much moisture, too much water, and it can't grow. There's too little moisture, too little water, and it cannot produce spores. So it just lays dormant. And then there's the Goldilocks zone, which is just right. And if it is just right, well then, that's obviously bad. and we want to get that corrected. Now, this fungal growth, this house was extremely old. Could this fungal growth have been here for a very, very, very long time? Yes. However, if you notice all the white that is around there, that is because somebody has already treated it for mold. And so these are just the sections that they did not treat for mold. And so with that being said, this homeowner is aware that they have had, at least in the past, issues with microbial growth, so or fungal growth. And so we just want to make sure that that we get that all, you know, worked out, and that we give it to you as a good piece of information. Damaged stones on this siding. So this stone veneer that was put on, we have some stones that are missing. The problem is, good luck finding stones that will match. Just good luck. It's not going to happen. So that can be challenging. So if a stone ever falls off your house, don't throw it away. Don't put it somewhere else. Just leave it there until you have time to come back with some construction adhesive, put that caulking gun, construction adhesive, put it on there. And if you don't want to take the time, you know, to put an anchor, tie the metal. So place an anchor, tie some metal around it, put your thing in place, tie some metal around it. If you don't want to do that, you can take a 2x4 and you can just lean that 2x4 right up against that stone and hold it in place, and that would be perfectly acceptable. All right, so right here, moisture inactive. The problem with moisture is that if there are signs that moisture was there before and there's not anymore, I really would love to know, why is that happening? So is that happening because the issue is resolved, or is that happening because the issue is seasonal? And so either one of those things, you know, how much do you trust the person that's saying, oh yeah, we did thousands of dollars of repairs to fix this moisture issue, or it only happens, you know, during the spring runoff season, so it's just wet for like 3 weeks and then we're done. Well, that's not great. And so I just want to make sure that if there is a moisture issue, that you're aware of the moisture issue and that we're getting it resolved as best as we possibly can. So blinds are damaged. All right, well, these here are not expensive blinds, but whenever blinds are damaged, if you want to match the other blinds all throughout the room, good luck trying that, because again, blind manufacturers purposely change out their inventory, change out their colors, have these subtle differences. So that way, instead of you buying one blind, you might have the desire to purchase, you know, maybe 5 blinds, 6 blinds, and then that obviously is more profitable for those companies. Same thing happens with flooring, same thing happens with stone, same thing happens with decking, same thing happens with almost any construction material, because they want to keep it fresh and hip and exciting, and also because they want to churn out their inventory and make it that, oh, if I just need one repair piece, instead of buying one piece, I'm buying a whole new thing. So that's why we put it out there. All right, this oven right now does not have a handle. Could you understand the problem with maybe trying to do Thanksgiving dinner and not having a handle to be able to get into the oven? So we very, very, very much want to be able to get into that oven, and that is something that either needs to be repaired or replaced. All right, this particular thing is a water heater, and this water heater is 17 years old. So with this water heater being 17 years old, the thing to keep in mind is that whenever a water heater fails, it fails catastrophically. What does that mean for a water heater to fail catastrophically? What that means is that the water heater isn't just going to have, you know, a little bit of an issue and so on and so forth. It is 100% going to be, okay, and now we have a leak and now your house is flooded. Or now we've overheated and the TPRV has released and we have released all of this hot, scalding hot water onto your floor, and we now have a flood. Or the TPRV has failed, it is overheating itself, and then it explodes like a pipe bomb. That happens as well. So whenever a water heater fails, it fails catastrophically. So if something is old, if it's an old water heater, just get it replaced, because the risk versus reward is not worth it. If you have a furnace or a boiler and they're very, very old, awesome. You know, stretch it out as far as you can. As long as your family is not at risk of carbon monoxide poisoning, then we're great. Because what will happen whenever that furnace dies? You have to buy a new one. Okay, what happens whenever that water heater dies? You flooded your entire house. So if you get a new furnace now, great, you got a new furnace. If the furnace lasts a little bit longer and then you get a new furnace, great, you got a new furnace at that point, and you lasted an extra year, an extra 2 years, whatever it may be. But with water heaters, you gotta replace them. You just got to. All right, this switch doesn't work. And so then the question is, do we have a bad circuit? Do we have a bad switch? Do we have a bad fan inside that bathroom? There's a lot of questions to be answered, and that's the job of an electrician. So you might want to get an electrician out there to take a look, or if you have a handyman that can do some minor electrical work, then they can probably diagnose pretty quickly, oh, we have no voltage coming through this line, therefore we need to replace the switch. Or, oh, there's voltage coming through the line, but the fan isn't working. Let's replace that bathroom ceiling fan. So Poop in the yard. Okay, all right, well, great, poop in the yard. What, you're a dog owner. What's it matter? Well, what it matters is that one, that is a biological hazard. Number two is that you're taking ownership of the house. So is it your responsibility to clean up after this person's dog? Last time I checked, if you have a dog, it's your responsibility to clean up after your dog. So if you're selling your house, just clean up the poop. That's all you need to do. All right, sewer scope. So sludge in the pipe. So yeah, we got some sludge in the pipe. That's not great. But what we can do is either have it roto-rooted or jetted, and then that gets rid of that sludge. If we do not get rid of the sludge, then we're going to basically create an impaction where there's no way for anything to pass, because each little bit of that sludge is just grabbing onto stuff. So it's grabbing onto toilet paper. It's grabbing onto disposable or flushable wipes. It's grabbing onto all that stuff, hair, soap scum, oils, greases, and it is then building larger until it's to completely envelop the entire pipe, and then we're out of luck. So I would say that since this is looks like an SDR35 type of pipe, we just want to get it jetted instead of using a roto-rooter, which has an auger bit that could potentially damage the plastic. So we just want something that, just like a pressure washer, sprays as it goes down through the pipe. All right, this furnace right here. I'm not 100% sure, but this might be a problem. All of that carbon monoxide gas is now coming up and out, and they put some tape around the edges, but man, that is just not the appropriate fix. This right here is what can kill an entire family in one evening. And I don't say that tongue in cheek. I don't say that jokingly. I truly mean that if you're going to mess around with a vent and not do it properly, you could kill an entire family. And that would be on you. So main thing would just be get a licensed plumber, somebody, or HVAC specialist who knows what they're doing, and get this done correctly, because the risk, oh, I saved $400, but I killed 6 people. You know, like, let's just get this fixed. So really big, important thing. All right, so next here, this is very minor, but there are dark stains on the sheathing, and so that's a sign of condensation. So this particular house, again, we have the house on this side, we have the south facing, and then this side is north facing. And so on the south facing side, we have all of this sun beating down on it, so there's no snow. So we have 0 snow, sun beating down, and all of that heat is radiating into the attic and creating a very hot attic space. Now, on this side over here, so on the north-facing side, we now have a big layer of snow, just a whole bunch of snow, like a big ice cube. And so what happens is that all of this sheathing right here is freezing cold, and then all of this sheathing here is really hot. And because vapor always comes up into the attic space from the living space, we have a high level of humidity in this space that is constantly, moving up and down, but that is humidity. And so if you know that you have a cold surface and hot, humid air, you're going to get condensation that forms on that side of the sheathing. And so that's why we see this discoloration, because is it mold? Yeah, but I mean, is it in the Goldilocks zone? Most definitely not. And so it's just one of those things that, how do we fix this? If we have this issue going on here, we can't get rid of this snow, but what we can do is all of this heat that's being generated, we can have it vent out of the attic. So whether that be soffit vents that go to ridge vents, and we have this nice convection current that is keeping us nice and cool in the attic space, great. Or the other option is that on this face right here, I can put an actual vent, 2 vents. So one vent here, one vent here. I can do a gable vent on the end. I can do a lot of different venting options to really get that air out of there. So that way that attic space in the wintertime stays nice and cool. And then that will prevent ice damming, and that will also prevent condensation on the sheathing, which would then prevent mold growth. So something to be mindful of. All right, this was very interesting. So this chandelier, and then there were light bulbs, but the chandelier, as you can see, was just hanging by its wire. Now that of course is bad, because if it fell, now most of the time people use wire nuts. So they take the wires, they put them in a nut, they twist the nut on. If something falls, then that wire nut, what's going to happen is we have the wire nut doing what it does, and then whenever something falls, it pulls, and it actually will remove, and the wire nut will pop off, and we have exposed electrical conductors. And so that's like the last thing that we want to have happen. So not only do I want to take this and hook it back up onto the hook and then have it be good to go, but I also really want to just redo those connections to make sure that I don't have any kind of arcing, which would be electricity jumping from one section to the other, because that's going to create heat, which could create a fire. Now, if this house, which it does not, if this house had an arc fault circuit interrupter, well, then if there was arcing, then it would shut off that circuit. And then you say, oh, why is this happening? And then you'll somehow try to bypass it. Please don't bypass an arc fault circuit interrupter. If it's tripping, replace it with a new one to see if it's actually functioning properly. And if it's still tripping, then you have an issue, and you need to diagnose where that issue is coming from. All right. Why people try to kill other people with electricity, I just don't understand. This wire is completely live, and this live wire is about at ear, maybe eye-ear level as you're walking through the garage. So it is car, then a really small space, wall, and then wire sticking out trying to touch you right on the face. And it is live. It is 100% a live wire. It just don't, just put a wire nut on it, put it back into a junction box, take your screwdriver, screw that junction box lid on, and then, let it be what it is, but don't have it exposed to the touch. All right, so this right here is Emergency Clean H2O. All right, I had no issues whatsoever with the water at this property. So why do I have Emergency Clean H2O at the house? Now, me as an inspector, we didn't do any kind of well test. There is no well test on this house. I think this was public water. But why is there an Emergency Clean H2O? That's something that you definitely want to inquire with seller, because you need to understand why it is such an issue that in every single room, they had at least one container that said Clean H2O. I'm very interested to find out why that is. All right, so this particular roof, there was some weird dark staining. And so basically what happened is I think that they wanted to install a humidifier. And what they did was to prevent the pipes from freezing, they basically just enclosed this entire room with insulation and with vapor barriers. And then you have a whole bunch of contributing factors. I think that there was the flue for the furnace. There was a pipe that was exhausting from a bathroom. There were your plumbing stack vent pipes, which also will create a little bit of heat. And then there was the humidifier that obviously was doing what it does. And we have the north-south issue that we were just talking about with roofs in general. Now, we had them do some testing the buyer had them do some testing, and that black discoloration came back as inconclusive, which means mold per what they write about whenever they say inconclusive. But basically, what they need to do is they need to decide on a strategy. They need to decide, is this going to be a cold attic or is this going to be a conditioned attic? And if it's cold attic, then you need to take off all that insulation off of the actual roof, out from underneath the sheathing. You need to get rid of all that insulation that's on this sloped wall if it's going to be a cold attic space, and you need to ventilate it. But I think that the reason that they put everything up there was because we're running a humidifier, and they didn't want the humidifier to freeze during the wintertime, because attics are designed to get cold. Now, if you want it to be a conditioned space, perfect. Then what you do is you leave all the insulation here on this wall, and then you remove all the insulation from these vertical interior walls, and then you create some type of ventilation to allow the conditioned air to move into that space. Either option is acceptable, but I think that the house was originally designed for that to be a cold attic space, and so you just need to be mindful of how an attic is designed, and then work towards that, because everything is designed as a system to work together. And as soon as you make modifications as simple as just adding more insulation, you can cause some pretty serious issues. All right, on this house, you have this beautiful, gorgeous wooden laminated beam. And you can see that, again, coming to Colorado, even though that laminated beam was probably only at 8% moisture, maybe 10%, but probably 8% moisture, it has since shrunken down to 5% or less moisture. And that's why we have that little gap right there where insects, water, anything else can come in. If you have some caulking, just put some caulking in there, because that caulking will expand and contract appropriately. It's stretchy enough that it can do that. I think that'd be fabulous. So then we're moving down here. All right, this is what I was talking about. The heater was inoperable. So basically the outdoor air temperature was 76 degrees. We were asking for it to be like 80 degrees in the floor, or maybe 90 degrees in the floor. And this had a WWSD, and you can see it right there. There's a little arrow on that LCD screen pointing onto the white background black text that says WWSD, which is a warm weather shutdown. Now, that's an appropriate thing to have, but then I couldn't really test all the zones. Now, it started to heat up, but then the day heated up faster than the floor did. And so then you can still kind of see some traces of that in-floor radiant heat. However, with a WWSD warm weather shutdown, there are ways to bypass it. But again, we aren't going that path of bypassing it, because if we modify anything in the system, we could potentially damage the system, and we just don't want to do that. All right, window well covers recommended. Now, you can ever so barely in this picture on the other side of the stairs see the back end of my truck. There was almost no room to park my truck. It was so tight on both sides, and you had to basically step around the second window well, which is, again, right at the bumper of my truck. There's the second window well on the far side of the stairs. On this side of the stairs, there's also a window well. Also, those stairs should have a handrail because there's more than four stairs, or there's 4 or more stairs. And these wells were basically too deep. There was another issue where they were so deep that they needed to have a permanent ladder installed, and they didn't have they didn't have a permanent ladder installed. They didn't have a cover to prevent people from falling into the well, and the stairs didn't have a handrail to prevent anybody from falling off the stairs and then falling into the well. I understand that it's a safety thing to have egress out of the basement, but you also have to consider that just because you're doing one thing for safety, you have to follow the entire process through. And if you're walking and trying to get around a car, because the only way to get around a car is to step on those 6x6 pieces of lumber, to step on one, span the difference, step on the other, and then you're back to where you need to be. So you're literally stepping over top of this window well, carrying groceries, and tell me that that's not safe. Come on. So anyway, get an appropriate cover, and a cover that will not allow snow to load up on top of it. So some type of metal grate that has a permanent ladder and an ability to lift open that hatch that a small child could do. And so does that mean that I have to have like some type of a piston to assist it? Yeah, maybe I need to have an air piston to assist it. Who knows? But it just needs to be something that a child can get out of. That's all that really matters. So multiple breaker manufacturers. I forget how many this one had, but basically, whenever you have all these different breakers, the manufacturer is UL listed to work a very specific way with their very specific breakers. If you start throwing in a hodgepodge of different breakers, it's not going to work exactly the way that it's supposed to. Let's easy example. Let's talk about the Apple ecosystem. You have your Apple Watch, you have your iPhone, you have your iPad, your Mac, you have your AirPods, you have all these things, and they all seamlessly seem to interact with each other. Now, as soon as you start using other people's products, the Apple ecosystem doesn't work quite as well. You may not be able to share audio the same way. You might have a certain amount of latency with your audio. You may not be able to copy and paste back and forth from your clipboard from one thing to the other, or have certain settings up and operational, or communicate between two devices with AirDrop. Like that. That is just stuff that they keep you in the Apple ecosystem for a financial gain. Maybe they do the same thing with these service panels, but the reality is that it is designed to work a very specific way with their very specific breakers. And as soon as you start putting in a whole bunch of other things, that is wrong. It is not the way that it's supposed to be. So again, multiple manufacturers, don't do it. Not good. All right, this oven was awesome. I should have just had the video put in here, but this house was I mean, there's no other way to say it. It was lipstick on a pig. This house was a very, very old house. They have done some renovations. This is the one that had the window well issues and a lot of other issues that aren't listed here. And the only nice way to put it is this was lipstick on a pig. And what that means is that the house itself is not phenomenal. And then you do all these things to make it look good. And the reason I say lipstick on a pig is because I looked at this and I was like, oh my gosh, that's a GE monogram. That is like GE's top of the line, super awesome, totally amazing range. It's great. Awesome. I'm looking around, I'm like, wow, they have like all this amazing stuff. It looks so good. Anyway, this was not brand new. This was used. And as soon as you open it up, the whole door falls off because both the hinges are completely broken. And it's just, again, one of those things, lipstick on a pig, that if you looked at this, because it is such an impressive oven and range, if you looked at it, you'd be like, damn, this house has been elevated to like a whole nother level. This is amazing. This is so good. And then as soon as you open it up and you remove the veil, then you see, oh, it's completely charred and burned on the inside. It needs a severe cleaning. It's missing parts, it's missing pieces, and the door hinge is completely destroyed, which means you probably have to replace the entire oven because there's no cost-effective way of replacing the parts that are damaged. And it's just one of those things where it's like they put this beautiful thing in there to make it look beautiful, but it's lipstick on a pig. So moving on, the The gutter system, let's see here. So the gutter system was completely clogged with just debris, which means that water was going back the other way. So then you can see here in the soffit that the soffit was damaged, and it was damaged from water coming back through the fascia and then going into the soffit, being trapped and then rotting away the wood. So we need to take care of a lot of these drainage issues before we can actually fix the soffit. So then here, same structure, same building. Basically the fascia is pulling off, is completely pulling off of the off of the eaves. And so with it pulling completely off of the eaves, that is going to be a failure at some point. But also it just allows water to be in there, expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. We're just going to have more and more and more issues. And then if we take a look on the same exact house, these are the shingles that are covering the roof. You can see that there are right over here, right there, you can see that there are basically like chip marks where people have tried to get that ice dam off of there and just completely destroyed the shingles. So you really need to be mindful of who it is that is removing the snow off of your property. So let me just grab another drink here. All right, egress inadequate. So this bedroom was a loft, and the loft had no windows for exit, no nothing. Therefore, could it be a bedroom? Not really, not without some type of exit. And so could it have been a bedroom back in the day? Yeah, most definitely. That might have been grandfathered in. That may have been allowed. But in today's safety standards, there's no way. This is extremely unsafe. And if you are going to be renting this property out, you just have to remember, if it's predictable, it's preventable. So what that means is that if it's predictable that there could be a fire and somebody could die in that upstairs bedroom, and you listed it as a bedroom available for rent, and somebody rented from you, that you could be held liable because you did not adequately protect the safety of your tenants. So nobody really wants that. So just be mindful of egress. All right. This particular deck was gorgeous. This house had wild strawberries growing in the yard. And if you've not seen a Colorado wild strawberry, they don't grow very big. They're basically like almost the size of a raspberry. And oh my gosh, they are so flavor packed. That has nothing to do with home inspecting. I did apologize for taking resources from their land, but oh my gosh, the strawberries were so good. I had like 6 of them. They were amazing. And just walking around the property, happened to find some wild strawberries. Very cool. So this wood post has failed, and all of it is just due to rot. And in fact, there were 3 vertical posts that were failed. The whole deck basically needs to be replaced. There were so many issues going on, but I just thought that this was a great example of how the wood post either dry rotted or wet rotted. Anyway, it rotted. And then what happened after that is that it can no longer support the load of the deck. And look at that buckling, how those pieces that used to be flat have completely buckled out under the compressive strength of that deck. So yes, this deck is no longer safe to be on. Okay, walking surface fasteners. Let's just walk around in our bare feet. Bad idea. So if any fasteners are sticking up like this, which is normal because you have expansion and contraction of materials, you have freeze thaw, lifting things up, nothing's going to put the nail back down except for a hammer. And so really what needs to happen is just hammer all that stuff down and just keep an eye on it. You may have to go to screws instead of nails, but if you're walking around in your bare feet or running, oh my gosh, you're going to have a bad time. Okay, in here, there's basically a double tap. And so there were 2 separate circuits being operated by this by these breakers. And the reason this is so not good is because the wires are designed to operate with a certain amount of amperage that goes through it. The breakers are designed to have a certain amount of amperage that goes through it. And the easiest way to think of this is that if I have a wire that can handle 15 amps, then right now I have that wire handling 15 amps. Excellent. So now we're all good to go. Now what can happen here is because we have these 2 sets of wires, is that let's just say, and this is not necessarily the way this is, but let's just say for the sake of conversation to help us understand this a little bit better, is that each set of wires is pulling 15 amps. Now, if one of these wires becomes disconnected, so there's basically moving on. So let's just say it the way that it is. On this particular one, this is set up as a 240 amps. So what happens is that each leg has 120 volts. Fantastic. Each leg has 120 volts. And this particular breaker, I don't remember what it was amperage-wise. I'll have to double click on the picture to double check. But it was either 30 or 50 amps. Okay, cool. These wires, first off, are not large enough to handle 30 or 50 amps. So then why are they doubled up like this? So that way they can handle the 30 to 50 amps. And so then what has happened here is that if one of those wires were to become disconnected, so let's say those 2 red wires that are not rated to handle 30 amps, let's say that each one of these wires can only handle 15 amps. Okay, so, but they put two 15 amp wires together, allowing it to handle 30 amps. But if one of these legs becomes disconnected, then that means that all of the 30 amps is going to go through this one wire, which is only designed to handle 15 amps. So if the wire is cut, damaged, or somehow just disconnected through movement, or whatever it may be, either at the end of the appliance, such as a laundry machine, or here at the service panel, or anywhere along the line, it was either damaged or disconnected in one way or the other. If one leg of that is disconnected, then we're going to have 30 amps going through a wire that can only handle 15, which means that wire is going to melt and melt off its protective sheathing. It's going to look just like a toaster, and it's going to catch the entire house on fire. So then what's happening here is that exact thing, meaning that that 30 amp breaker is going to look at that wire and say, I'm giving you 30 amps, but it doesn't realize that the wire is too small to handle that 30 amps, and then you burn down your entire house. So that was probably just easier to explain exactly what was wrong with it. So that's exactly what's wrong with this particular instance, and obviously not ideal. So why did they do this? They did this so that way they didn't have to rerun a thicker gauge wire, because that can be very expensive, because sometimes you have to like, you know, cut holes in walls, redo the texturing, redo the paint, whole bunch of work just to get some wires into place. Oh, you know, hey, we have this extra wire, we can double up over here and then take these wires there, and then we can do that. No. Totally inappropriate, and a really, really good way to catch a house on fire. So something to think about. On this exact same service panel, there's a whole house surge protector. And if the light is off, the circuit is damaged. And so what caused this surge? What caused this thing? Could it have been a lightning strike? Sure. Could it have been something inside the panel? Sure. But basically there was some type of surge, something happened, and we need to replace this whole home surge protector because it is not working, and it says replace immediately. Now the surge protectors, this one is actually pretty large. They've gotten a lot smaller, and now they can just take up the same size as your circuit panel, or as a circuit breaker. All right, this bathtub, it had a rug, and I love moving rugs back. Now I don't think this was done on purpose. I don't even know if the seller is aware of it, but whenever I move that rug back, the tub, so here's where the flooring was installed. The tub was installed up against it, and what has happened is the tub got kind of like kicked or bumped at some point and got moved backwards. And so now we have this like gap right in there. And the carpet was ever so perfectly covering up that gap. Did they know about it? Maybe, maybe not. It could have just been that somebody bumped into it. So what can we do? We can take a suction cup and we can just pull that right back out. We're all good to go. Nothing bad to happen there. I would put some caulking, some sealant on there. I think that'd be really, really good. All right. So leak present water pipe. So this again is a hot water heater. And yes, there are leaks present on this water heater. And I wonder what the age. So we ended up looking this up, and this was built in 1991. So that's like 30 years old. That's not great. And so the conversation was, oh, it's fine. No, it's not. 12 years is pretty much the limit for a water heater. 12 years. Okay, so 12 years. It's at 30 years right now. So that's a little bit excessive. And what's happening is that we have this leak, and they're like, well, the leak is coming from the fitting. Okay, yes, you are correct. The leak is coming from the fitting. But if we have a leak coming from a fitting, whenever the fitting is supposed to be a lifetime install for the house, meaning that that copper should be able to last the entire lifetime of that house. And you're telling me that we have a leak at the fitting, which should last a lifetime, and we don't have any issues with a water heater that should only last 12 years, that's 30 years old? Nah, I'm not buying it. So you got to get a new water heater. It has to happen. It's just the best thing that you could possibly do. So moving on. Oh, and then another thing. So basically, HTP is the brand that has Superstore. So Superstore, HTP, they do not tell you based off of the serial number how old this thing is. But thankfully on their website, and not all manufacturers do this, like I wish the Triangle Tube would do this, but on their website, you can put in that serial number, and then that serial number will tell you how long of a warranty it was designed to have. That's what these red dots are. It kind of has the image cut off, but it tells you how long the warranty was for commercial use, for residential use, and it basically just tells you how old that unit is, and that's a very, very, very good thing. So this right here, insulation blocking soffit vents. So there should be baffles installed, and there are in fact baffles installed. And so what will happen is that between the roof layer here, the air should be able to come up in this space, and so then you have your baffle. Well, the problem is that they put so much insulation in that it just filled up the baffles. And so now the baffles are doing absolutely nothing. So we either need to pull or rake that insulation back or install new baffles. Now, I believe that we should install new baffles because I don't want to reduce the amount of insulation that is near the edges of the house. But either way, you have to rake it back, install a baffle, and then put it forward. Is this a big deal? Meh, not really. But it should be something that is fixed. That would be my recommendation. Now, the people that installed it said, we did install baffles. Yes, you did. You can ever so barely see one of the baffles in the middle, like on this side of the picture. You can ever so barely see the baffle, and that it's being filled in with insulation. So not great. All right, this boiler here, talking about triangle tube. So this one right here, the LCD screen doesn't work. Now, the problem with the LCD screen not working is, does it need to work? Well, I mean, since it's already been set up, the answer is no, it doesn't need to work. But if it doesn't work, how can you do diagnostics? How can you check or modify settings? How can you do anything, any kind of maintenance that needs to be done on the unit if you cannot access that LCD panel? So more than likely, the entire control panel is going to need to be replaced. All right, so here's an interesting thing, and this is a hot topic, very, very hot topic. So the NEC, the National Electric Code, and we are not code inspectors, the NEC says that whenever you're around a hot tub, that any metal surface needs to be bonded, meaning electrically connected to each other and then taken back to, basically a ground to make sure that nothing gets electrified, that there's no stray voltage getting and doing whatever it's supposed to not do. And so the idea here is that every piece of metal needs to be bonded. Now, these pieces of metal are basically holding together pieces of wood. And if you know anything about wood, you know that wood does not transfer electricity. It is non-conductive. And so if we have non-conductive wood, then why is it, if each one of these pieces is isolated, why is it that we still need to bond it? And that is where the whole point of contention comes from, that people are like, well, you have to because that's what the code book says. Well, but then there are other things that say, like there have been updates and changes and different verbiage. And so now it's just one of those things where it's like, should we not? In this particular case, I think this was a little bit of overkill. But what I like is that the electrician that installed everything was very, very, very mindful and was like, no, this is something that we need to do. This is something that needs to happen. And I think that that's kind of cool that they stepped up and did that thing. So next here, floor condition, wet spot. So very, very interesting. I had like a sneaking suspicion that there could be an issue, but I saw nothing that indicated that there was, any kind of major issue the way that it looks like right here until I did the thermal camera. So let's take a look here. So on the exterior of the house, I know it's super duper trendy to have zero overhang, zero eaves, but the whole point of that roof is to protect the wall, to protect it from water coming in. And if the roof is so flat, then we're going to have water, a lot of water coming down this siding. Now, anytime you have stucco actually is porous and allows water to come in. So then do we have weep holes? Do we have the ability for water to drain out? And no, there weren't any weep holes. But then what do you actually do in a fixture like this? It's really, I'm unsure. So then, okay, we have some wood. Maybe there was a little bit, not really, like very minor anything. There was nothing that really stood out that I was like, wow, this is a major issue. This is something that needs to be resolved. And then whenever I ran the thermal camera, look at that wet spot. It was drenched. If you were walking around in your socks would be soaking wet. This is because the water came down right over here. So the water came down off of this wall, came underneath, and then filled up and saturated this entire carpet. And right there in the thermal camera, I did not expect to see that. But again, we checked the ceilings, we checked the walls, we checked the floor, and wow, very, very eye-opening. All right, again, stop trying to kill your inspector. That's all I can say. Put some wire nuts on those wires. That's all you need to do. All right, here's another live wire. So this one here is just right above your water heater, and it's just hanging out, and it's completely live. 120 volts, 15 amps, enough to just kill you, just like that. So wire nuts, people. Put wire nuts on things. All right. Extreme likelihood of lead paint. So basically, this house was built in 1878, I think. And basically, the way that lead paint flakes pretty much just tells me guaranteed you have lead. And you just don't eat the chips. That's all I can really tell you. Don't eat the paint chips. On this house, they tried to do a repair of some sort, and what that ended up doing was trapping water inside of the tank of this toilet. And whenever I was putting the toilet back on after doing a sewer scope, it was leaking. And I'm like, what? And I touched the nut, and the bolt just fell right out in my hand. And I said, oh, well, that's a defect. I mean, was this my fault as an inspector for damaging this toilet? Well, I'm the one that touched the toilet, so does that mean that it's my fault? That's quite the question, isn't it? It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But if you look for a bolt to have rusted the entire way through, a bolt rusting the entire way through is something that was already a defect and had nothing to do. I just happened to be the unlucky guy that touched the thing. And so because I touched it, then it fell apart in my hands. Now, if that was a perfectly good bolt and I hit it with, a chisel, a cold chisel, or I, overly torqued it and it broke off, yeah, that would be my fault, 100%. But this rusted the entire way through, which means not my fault. Now, I basically, what I did was I shut off the water, I drained everything, and then I took the lid off, and then I placed the bolt on top of the lid. And so that way, anybody that comes into that house knows this toilet is not functional and that this toilet has a leak, and so you should not try to turn it back on. And that, I think, is about as good of an indication as you can do. I also contacted the listing agent, let them know. Nobody seemed overly concerned. But you would just replace these. You just need to replace these, and they are being replaced with nylon threaded bolts and nuts. And the reason why is because nylon doesn't rust. Obviously, it's a plastic. So, standing water in the crawl space. So this house, again, 1878. There was a lot of standing water in this crawl space. Now, somebody put a sump pump inside of this crawl space. And what you can see is that there is, right over here, there is this little floating thing. And whenever that goes like this, then it turns on the sump pump. And whenever it goes like this, it does not. Can you see if the sump pump is not actually turned on and pumping? That's because the sump pump is not installed properly. Somebody literally said, oh, there's a lot of water. I'm going to buy a sump pump. And they just threw it in there. Okay, great. They threw a sump pump in here. So is that a problem? Yeah. Yeah, that's a big problem. Let's talk about this real quick. No weather protection or GFCI protection. Okay, so there's no GFCI. What's this plugged into? Oh, it's plugged into a thing that's just sitting in the water. If we had any issue where any stray electrical voltage, went into that water, then that electricity is going to go right into that water. In like those video games, sometimes there'll be like electrified water and like, oh, it hurts you as a character. Except as a home inspector, it would kill you. If there is standing water, never, ever, ever, never, ever go into the water. You will die. You will literally die. Don't touch the water. Don't even look at the water. Don't take a picture of the water. Oh, well, John, I have a camera. Yes, don't let the camera touch the water because it is possible that through the pole that the camera is attached to, you could get shocked. So first things first. We need to address the fact that there is no GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupter. What that means is if there's an electrical current, if any of that current goes somewhere else, meaning electrocuting somebody, then we need to cut it off within 200 milliseconds and we're good to go. So first off, since there's no GFCI on this is already extremely dangerous. Secondly, they didn't install the sump pump the way that it was supposed to be installed. Third, who knows if there's any other stray wires that are anywhere inside of here. So as an inspector, there's no way that I'm going in there. Fourth, does this really matter if there's all that water in there? The answer is yes. Why does it matter? Well, because we talked about that Goldilocks zone, so we could have mold. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the biggest issue here because there is a lot of breathing. But if you take a look at the saturation of these pieces of insulation, all this insulation is saturated, and what you can't really see here is that actually there's a lot of insulation that has fallen down, and that's fallen down because of all the moisture and humidity, which has basically made it so heavy that it's fallen out of that floor area, which then reduces the energy efficiency inside the house. Look at here where there are two bats, two sections of insulation that have fallen out, and you can see how much colder that section of the floor is compared to everything else. Talk about your heating bills. I mean, obviously a house from 1878 or 2 or whatever it was, all that air is moving, and so you have an extremely energy inefficient house, especially because it was single pane windows. But then you add on the fact that the floor isn't even insulated. That's a recipe for disaster. So the thing about this water is that yes, a proper sump pump should be installed to help keep that water table low, at least around the house. But the other thing is that this house is an is basically a rubble foundation. It is stone and rubble, and what that means is that there's a lot of cracks and a lot of areas for water to percolate through. And so what that also means is that whenever these houses were built, nowadays our houses are so like buttoned up, and they're like, I will not allow anything in here. You are from the environment? No. You are from the outside world? No, not going to happen. And so then what happens here? It's more like, well, we were building houses in the 1800s that definitely interacted a lot more with the local environment. And so here, does it matter that we have a high water table? Nah, they probably got down to bedrock, or at least, you know, we've had over 100 years to have it settle, almost 150 years to have it settle. And so what's really happening here then is that this is a totally natural function of this house. But then let's talk about what's not natural. Fiberglass insulation, not natural. Trying to tighten up the house's air permeability, basically trying to tighten up the house so that way there's less airflow. That's not natural. There's a lot of things that we will do to modernize this house that are not natural and not the way the house was designed. And so we just need to be mindful of that. That is there water in the crawl space? Yes. Is it standing water in the crawl space? Yes. On a modern build, would this be a deal breaker? Hell yes. But what about right here? Nah, not really. You know, you want a house from the 1800s? Here's a house from the 1800s. This is the way that it was built, and this is the way that it has been for the last 100 years. How long is that? How long has that sump pump been there? I would say about a week. And the reason I'd say about a week is because the hose is brand new. It was brand new. The pump was brand new. Everything was brand new except for that extension cord. That was not brand new. But obviously they put it on the market and they said, we need to do something. And they didn't have a full understanding of what it was that needed to be done. When I talked to the neighbor, and the neighbor's like, yeah, I installed this super awesome sump pump. It's amazing, whatever. Told me all about it, and he's doing just fine. Everything's great. So install a proper sump pump. You'll be golden. All right. So right here, we have exposed wires. So we just want that conduit to be lifted back up where it goes because we just don't want there to be any damage. We also don't want any insects to be able to go into our service panel because they may bring in materials that could be combustible, and then we'd have a fire inside of our service panel, which is less than ideal. This bathroom sink, I wouldn't just say that the valve handles were loose. I turned them and they literally wanted to just pop right off. And so all it is a little set screw. Tighten up that set screw. If you have a screwdriver, you're good to go. All right, let's talk about this real quick. So this particular water sample that we have came back, and it was that the H2O sample indicates well under leach field or cross-contamination influence, H2O treatment recommended. All right, so after talking to the chemist a little bit more, man, he gave me the entire breakdown of how urine goes from each chemical all the way down to its final, more or less stable state. And so we're talking about all these nitrates, nitrites, whatever, and that's of course why I'm not a chemist. And we got into the details that basically what's happening is that the chemical compounds that he found are right at the very, very end of their thing. So it's like the smallest amount of contamination. And he's like, so we were talking about where our leach field is and this, that, the other. And he's like, yeah, I don't even know if it's your leach field on that particular property. It could be a leach field from another property and whatever. And I said, yeah. And you know, this is near the tarn. And he's like, oh my gosh, that explains everything. Okay. So what happened is that we have a dam that is being worked on and they have drained this entire lake. And so now we're talking 40, 50 feet of water that is now drained. So if that 40, 50 feet of standing water has been drained, then that means that and this house is like one or two, I think one house back from this pond. And so then because of that, the water table has now dropped that 50 feet, let's say. And because of that, the leach fields naturally would have, you know, an extra 50 feet of water by however much distance. And this very final last step of the breakdown process of urine is what he's detecting, would normally be able to be, I guess, dissolved or dispersed throughout that whole water table, water column. And right now, it's at a 2.6. And so it can be all the way up to a 10 before the EPA says that there's anything going on. But Ed was like, I think there's something going on. He went a little bit further and he found that there was something going on. But he was like, whenever they are done doing that dam, they've refilled the water, give it a couple months, and then retest that water sample. Then he's like, I bet you that number will be so minuscule, so tiny, so small. And I think that makes perfect sense, 100% sense. And it was very, very interesting to get this result back. I learned a lot about water tables, how leach fields do eventually leach into the water table. Just a lot of really, really good information. So thank you, Ed, for all that great information. All right, roof flashing. Let's talk about this right here. So basically there's a this, that, the other kind of conversation going on right now. I think we just had this inspection not too long ago, and it's still under debate. They're still negotiating who's responsible for what, when, where, and why. And basically the long story short is that this particular roof doesn't have appropriate flashing that is visible, so we think that something is wrong, and so we call it out as being something wrong. Now, if we are incorrect, awesome. I would so much rather say something is wrong and then be incorrect than say nothing at all and have it be something that is wrong. That obviously is way worse. But let's talk about a few things here. So a roofing company says that there is nothing wrong and there's nothing to worry about. Perfect. I love it. Nothing to worry about. So all that black stuff that's on there is basically a product called mastic. And mastic is like a caulking, but for a roof. So why do we have all this mastic on there? Because if it's properly flashed, you don't need to have any mastic. Okay, cool. If it's properly flashed, you don't need to have mastic. Because what's going to happen is that water is going to come down off of that roof. And whenever water comes down off this roof surface, what's going to happen is that the water, instead of, whenever we have these overlaps like this, and instead of having the water coming down on these overlaps and coming down and then dripping down onto the next one, what it does is the water actually gets stuck and goes underneath just a little bit and then will come down onto the next one. And so right here, the way this roof is set up is that water is basically going to get in between the red roof and the brown siding. And whenever that water gets between the red roof and the brown siding, what's going to happen is that water is going to come under, and now it's right here at the sheathing for the house or for the roof deck, and now we have water underneath our roof, which is going to cause a leak. John, it's not going to cause a leak. Everything's good. They told me everything was good. Okay, why are we using black mastic right here to try to prevent water from going somewhere that the water wants to go? Because mastic, you're going to have to replace that like once every couple of years, once a year, depending. So that's not great. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it should be. So right here, I flipped the image so that way it kind of matches better. But okay, so in our mind, we have siding, black mastic, and then we have a roof. Well, what's really happening here is that we should have the kind of like more or less brown section right here. This is going to be just your sheathing. So this is going to be like a plywood or really an OBS, an oriented OSB, oriented strand boarding, and that is going to be there. Then you see that they have some type of basically an underlayment that sticks up onto that wall, and that is like a rubber type membrane that is like its last defense to protect any water that has gotten through. And so, all right, so right now, obviously that's not the way we want to do things. So we move into this next image. And here in this next image, what we have is, okay, they've now added this thing where if you can see the difference between the two, we have a ridge right up against the wall in this top picture here. And then that means that any water that gets between that section is going to go towards the wall because it has something similar to this. So any water that falls on this side is going to go down this way. And any water that falls on this side is going to go down this way. And so if we take a look at that picture directly up above me, then we see that if any water gets onto this side over here, it's going to fall down towards the roof. But thankfully, it's going to be caught by the underlayment, which was properly installed. But the underlayment is not designed to handle water flow or anything like that. So we need to keep the water away from our last resort of keeping the house from being flooded. So if we take a look at the next picture, they've basically created a cap. So right here up above me is this cap. And this cap will basically catch the water and then move it out past that last little ridge. So that way all of the water is on this side, which means all the water gets put back on top of the roof to then be moved away. So then if we look at the last photo, then that should be covered over, and it should be covered over with our siding. So whenever it's covered over with our siding, fantastic. It's been covered over with our siding. That looks great. So why is it that the siding is not completely touching down here? The reason why is because, as I've said before, wood is like a vampire. Even after death, it's going to keep sucking. And its blood that it's sucking is water. So that wood is going to keep sucking even though it is dead and gone. And so any exposed end grain is going to suck up that water. So we need to have at least an inch gap to prevent any moisture from being trapped there at the end grain. So if we know this is what it's supposed to look like right here, and what we're saying is that we have this section right here. So the water is going to come down the roof. So right here it comes down, gets trapped underneath on the siding, and then it comes down, gets trapped underneath on the siding, and then it comes down, hits this 90-degree bend, and then it comes over. And then it drops down onto the rest of the roof, and then it is evacuated away from the house. This is the proper way to do this. Now, a professional roofer has since told us that there is nothing wrong with the way that this is done. All right, I am not a professional roofer. So I guess I don't know what I'm talking about. Moving on. what we have is a sump pump that is present. So this sump pump does not appear to be in use, but you know, is it a seasonal issue? We have trenches that are dug to get water going different places. So just inquire with the seller, find out why is there a sump pump? When do we have issues? How much water do we have? And what do we need to do to make sure that we are good to go for the next, let's say, spring runoff season? All right, this hearth extension, loose wood, loose rocks, cracks, whatever. Again, you can fix it yourself or you can hire a mason to fix it. Fixing this type of stuff is not a really big deal, but depending on where this is, and this is not in this particular issue, but if your hearth is cracked and we have an ember that falls down into the crack of the hearth, it is basically combustible, flammable material, non-combustible, non-flammable material, and then you have your fire. And so if anything falls onto this, then nothing bad will happen. But if there is a crack that it can get through to that combustible material, then we're going to have ourselves a problem. So we just don't want to have a problem, ideally. So then this bathtub, the jet's not working. The jetted tub, the motors are not working. Could a GFCI be tripped? Yeah, most definitely. Could the switch be damaged? Yeah, definitely. Could the motor be bad? For sure. There's a million different things. Well, not a million. There's probably like 15 things that could actually be wrong. But I think there are 3 that we want to check right from the get-go. All right. Animal scratches. If we have this well-behaved of an animal that has free reign of the entire house, I bet you we're probably also going to have urine issues. Just something to be mindful of. Anytime you see animal scratches, also think to yourself, does it smell like urine? Is there any issue with the carpet? Or is it all hardwood floor? What's going on here? Because if your animal is misbehaved this bad to destroy the house, or if the animal has free reign, then you could be away at work and have no idea what the animal has done in the house. And then you might not go to a section of a room and not smell it until it's already saturated completely into the carpet, into the subfloor, into the padding, whatever it may be. So just be mindful. All right, temperature pressure relief valve. We talked about one of these failing. So first off, that PVC fitting that's attached to that cannot handle this particular temperature pressure relief valve. So temperature pressure relief valve is going to release at 150 PSI or 210 degrees Fahrenheit. This PVC, I think, only goes up to like maybe 170 degrees or something like that, and then it melts. So if 210 degree water is coming out of this temperature pressure relief valve, that's just going to melt. Additionally, there's nothing bringing that water safely down to 6 inches or less away from the ground, which means that I could just be standing there and have my entire body scalded by this hot water leaving this area. And that obviously is going to be a bad time. So this house has a little bit of settlement cracking. You can tell because it's smaller at the bottom, bigger at the top. And so it's not just a normal shrinkage crack. It is more or less a settlement crack. Now that is extremely common to have, and depending on the age of the house, it may not be an issue at all, but we still just want you to be aware of it. But in general, it's okay to have slight settlement because most houses do slightly settle. And then we just want to double check, do we have any issues opening and closing windows, opening and closing doors? How old is the house? If this settlement crack is on a house that's only like 2 years old, I'd say, whoa, let's pump our brakes for a second. Let's get in a structural engineer. Let's get in a soils expert. Let's make sure that we aren't on any type of expansive soil. Let's make sure that this house is actually good to go. If this house was built in the 70s and this is all that you have, you're great. You're golden. You're fine. There's not, like, if in 50 years, this is the worst that has happened, in 50 years, even if you doubled that, that's no big deal. So anyway, moving on. All right, I think that there's some pests in this crawl space. How do I know? This is how I know. All right, so other than, the mouse droppings and other things like that, if somebody is actively taking steps to kill these pests and we are able to find the product that they're using to do that, then obviously at one point it has become enough of an issue that they have a need to do so, meaning that they may have heard them in the walls, they may have heard them under the floor, they may have heard them wherever, which means that there were probably a lot, and they probably urinated and defecated on a lot of things that they probably should not have. So just something to be mindful of whenever you take ownership of the house. What? We're at the end? Man, I feel so energized. I think it's the tea. I think that's what it is. I should do tea for every one of these. I feel very energized. So basically, long story short, I'm moving to North Carolina. I'm very, very excited about that. So this will be the last time that we're filming in this particular studio setup. I will be getting the studio set up in North Carolina. So probably middle of September, depending on how quickly the studio can get set up, we'll have our next in-service training. All of our future in-service trainings with my team are all going to be basically a Zoom call, so we can discuss a whole bunch of topics. We always have topics to discuss. We always have inspections to debrief on. But Shea and Jeremy are phenomenal. They are the ones that basically hold this business together, and I absolutely love them. They are amazing. So lucky to have them. If you guys have any questions, you can send to Moose Home Inspections an email. You can call our office anytime. All of our information is just one Google search away. Other than that, I think that pretty much wraps up this in-service training. I'd like to say thanks and have a wonderful day.